And welcome to the latest KRAD COVID readings, where I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and I am reading my writing to try to alleviate this nightmare that we find ourselves continually in. This week we're going to conclude security, which includes flashbacks to Corsi first meeting Christine Vale. Vale actually was introduced in the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series, but soon became a very important supporting character, not only in the Next Generation novels that were written that took place between Insurrection and Nemesis, where Worf was off being a Federation ambassador to the Klingon Empire, and so the Enterprise still needed a security chief. So Vale took on that role throughout several different novels. And then later she became made first officer of the Titan under Captain William Riker, and became a major supporting character in the Star Trek Titan series that was published. So she became a very important character, and she started in the S.C.E. So anyway, and this story that I'm in the midst of reading gives a lot of her background, which was then used by the writers of both the Next Gen and the Titan novels. Anyhow, we conclude security. Chapter 9. USS Da Vinci in search operations between stations Kel Artis and Deep Space Nine. Now. Tev awoke from his nap, feeling very refreshed. The fact that his bunk was located in a Karjulan passenger shuttle didn't seem to matter all that much. Mr. Tev is expressing a valid concern, giving me something to think about. A little bluntness is a good way to do that. A Karjulan was sitting in the seat opposite Tev's bunk. How long until we reach the base station? Tev asked. The Karjulan checked the chronometer on his wrist. I never was good at math. Should be soon? Half an hour, perhaps? Good. What I'm trying to say in the nicest manner possible, Tev, is that I'd like to work on this solo. Something went wrong. Tev realized that the shuttle wasn't decelerating, even though at half an hour from their destination, the slowdown should have commenced. The shuttle was bringing them down the elevator that took one from the massive orbital ring around Karjula to the planet's surface. Realizing that his engineering acumen could be of use, he clambered out of his bunk and started down the ladder to the conductor's level. You're wasting your time, the Karjulan said, and only then did Tev realize that his fellow passenger was Ivraith, the one who took credit for Tev's own study of the orbital ring. Ignoring Ivraith, Tev continued down the ladder. Why allow everyone to believe the paper was his and not yours? By the time he got to the conductor's level, alarms were blaring. What's happening? The Karjulan conductor turned around. This was also Ivraith. Who are you? You know who I am, he said impatiently. Tell me what's happening, Ivraith. The brakes appear to have failed. We're in freefall. Tev asked, what of the emergency brakes? Ivraith shook his head. There must be something we can do. There is nothing you can do, Morglash Tev. You know nothing about the ring. I'd say you were right about everything except about its being unoccupied. There, you're dead wrong. Ignoring Ivraith's words, Tev said, I think if we restart the computer system, we might be able to restore the electromagnetic polarity. He went to the nearest console and began the shutdown sequence. Then the station went dark. As it did, the shuttle rocked as it bounced off the guide rails, out of control. Can you restart that console? He asked Ivraith, who looked ridiculous in the conductor's uniform. Of course I can. I know everything about the ring, thanks to my stealing your work. The next time you step out of line with me, I'll have your ass in front of a court-martial at warp 10. Tev? Tev, I don't want to die. At first the voice was Ivraith's, then Tev realized it was a woman's voice. Mother? That was the last straw, Tev. That was the last time you disobey my orders or flaunt my authority. Tev? She repeated, but it wasn't his mother this time. It was Commander Gomez. We're not going to stop, are we? And that's because you screwed up. Just like you did on Karjula, just like you did at Averil. She's right, Ivraith said, and now we're all going to die because of you. The shuttle crashed on the surface of the planet. And Tev awoke with a start, sweat matting down the hair on his body and soaking through the sheets of his bunk. That dream had been a gift from an ancient species known as the Furies, whom Tev encountered while serving on the Madison. It was years before the dream stopped recurring every night, and he hadn't had it for months, until the Da Vinci's mission to Karjula and his reunion with Ivraith. This time, though, was different. Neither Ivraith nor Commander Gomez had ever been part of the dream before. Computer, time. The time is 0950 hours. Tev snuffled. Not even 2 hours sleep. Computer, locate Specialist Falwell. Crewperson Falwell is in the mess hall. Tev got up from his bunk and changed into uniform. Bartholomew was probably still working on his Seclarian article. Tev needed someone to talk to, and Bartholomew was the only person on the ship he'd even consider a personal conversation with. A scattering of crew members were in the mess hall when Tev arrived. Several engineers, Hammett, Langford, Bennett, and Phelps, were drinking coffee with a woman Tev did not recognize, but whom he presumed to be Lisa Iristorza, the replacement for the late Theodore Deverick. The Gamma Shift bridge crew were also just getting up to leave after what appeared to be a large post-shift meal. Tev went straight for Bartholomew, who had a table to himself, his pads spread out as they had been in the observation lounge. "Excuse me, Bartholomew, may I join you?" The thin linguist looked up and smiled when he saw Tev. "Sure, have a seat." The smile grew and he added, "I'm afraid I don't have any Apple Rancher candies." "It is a bit early for those." Tev found himself returning the smile. He wasn't sure why he felt so much at ease around Bartholomew. Perhaps it was because he did not seem intimidated by Tev's brilliance. "What can I do for you, Tev?" "I am in need of counsel, and you are the only person on this ship I trust to provide it. I am having difficulties with Commander Gomez." He filled Bartholomew in on their recent conversation. "The poor woman is obsessed with me, and now, because I refuse to return her affections, she is sabotaging my career. I cannot go to Captain Gold. He would likely take her side." Bartholomew was frowning now and scratching his chin. Tev? I don't know how to tell you this, but..." he sighed. "You're wrong. Dead wrong." Tev found that impossible to believe. "About what?" Shaking his head. "I honestly don't know where to start. But the biggie is Commander Gomez's alleged affection for you. Trust me, that is all in your head." "Don't be ridiculous. She has gone from indecisive and hesitant to aggressive and hostile. Of course she..." "Tev, you're thinking like a Tellarite." Confused, Tev asked, "How else would I think?" "Well, if you're going to psychoanalyze a human, then you should think like one. Humans don't court each other that way. Hostility isn't a sign of respect, especially not from her." "What is it a sign of, then?" "That she's really, really pissed off. And if you don't do something about it, not what you think you should do about it, it'll be more than your promotion prospects that you'll have to worry about." Bartholomew took a quick sip of his coffee. "Tev, you are an incredibly brilliant engineer, but you're not perfect, and you're not among Tellarites." "You have not said anything of which I wasn't already aware." Tev snuffled. This conversation was starting to annoy him. He supposed that Bartholomew's insights were useful since he, like the commander, was human, but still. "Then you should probably start acting appropriately. You're third in command, Tev, not first and not second." "I am also aware of that. I suppose you will also tell me that I fear that others will steal my work." "Do you fear that?" Tev snuffled angrily. "Of course not! I can't imagine why anyone would believe that I would think a crew of this ship would be on a level with Evraith." Bartholomew raised an eyebrow. "This is the same Evraith who took your definitive work on that orbital ring around Karjula and claimed it as his own. A brilliantly written monograph. I read it, remember, that made Evraith's entire career that Evraith?" Bartholomew raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry. I do not appreciate your sarcasm, Bartholomew." Tev snuffled again and made up to get up from his chair. "The life Evraith now has would not have been for me. I'm better off." "Sure, you know that now. And feel that way now. But 20 years ago? When Evraith first stole your work, Romulan puns and all?" Tev stopped rising and remained seated, remembering that Bartholomew had been the one, at Commander Gomez's instigation, to read the monograph Evraith claimed as his own, and recognized the Romulan curses he'd worked in as a puns to an audience that knew nothing of that language. Bartholomew continued. "You were just a young student. The betrayal had to hurt, and I can imagine that you would have sworn to yourself, even subconsciously, that you wouldn't let that happen to you again." Tev almost smiled. "You're thinking like a human." "Maybe." Bartholomew did smile. "That doesn't necessarily mean I'm wrong." He dropped the smile. "Look, whether you like it or not, this is a team, and a small one at that. I know you can work with people. You've come close more than once, but you've got to set aside your ego." "And my arrogance, too?" "No, you need that." Bartholomew chuckled. "I know Tellarite, remember? I know that the word for arrogance and the word for self are one and the same." Tev nodded. He remembered his surprise that the primary human tongue didn't consider the concepts synonymous. But you can't just barrel through on your own brilliance and hope everyone will catch up. Before you know it, you're going to fall behind. Senior staff and S.C.E. team, report to the bridge. Lieutenant Shabalala's voice snapped Tev to attention. He stood up, as did Bartholomew. Looks like we're needed, Bartholomew said. Indeed. Tev turned to the linguist. Thank you, Bartholomew. You have given me a great deal to think about. Nodding, Bartholomew said. I just hope they're calling us to the bridge because they found Elizabeth and Dr. Bashir. That is my hope as well. And with that, they departed the mess hall together. Chapter 10. Peace Officer Headquarters, Pembroke City, Izar, 10 years ago. Lieutenant Corsi was still wiping sleep out of her eyes when she entered Officer Vale's office. You called me? Yes, I did. Vale sounded stiffer and more formal than she had over the past 3 days of their investigation. She was standing behind her desk, leaning forward, her hands flat on the desk's surface. It had been a tiring few days, as Corsi and Vale had spent every waking hour, which outnumbered their sleeping hours by a ratio of 21 to 3, going over the records of the previous homicides, and talking over subspace to everyone involved that they could track down. They also determined that the killer was likely to be humanoid. The wound patterns all indicated that the angle of the killing blast was likely to be someone of average human height, standing about a meter away. Since the majority population on all the planets where the homicides took place was humanoid, this was hardly conclusive of anything, and the lack of any kind of trace evidence made it even less so. It was frustrating that, with sensors that could detect a particular grain of sand on a desert planet, they couldn't figure out who killed 11 people. Izar itself had been all but locked down, with temporary curfews put in place and regular sensor sweeps looking for the phaser in question. All the previous murders had come in threes, so everyone was waiting for the third in this sequence to be completed. In particular, human women with long dark hair were encouraged to stay in their homes until the person was caught. Corsi couldn't help but notice that both Vale and Kim fit the bill. She had managed to steal a few hours' sleep with Dar, which meant she had gotten very little sleep at all, until the summons came on her comm badge. Dar had barely noticed the call, and she told him that she had to go to work, and she'd see him later. Vale stared at her now with a rather intense expression. Corsi wondered if that meant they'd found something. Lieutenant Corsi, after I briefed you 3 days ago, did Officer Giacoya give you access to one of our comm terminals so you could contact the Roosevelt? Not liking the tone in the officer's voice at all, Corsi asked, You know I did. You're treating this like an interrogation. Why? Vale did not answer the question, instead posing another. After doing so, did you then make an unauthorized call to a Lieutenant Dar Ableen? It wasn't unauthorized, Corsi said tightly. And if it was, well, I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to break any regulations. What is this about, officer? When I summoned you here this morning, did you come from Lieutenant Ableen's quarters at the Starfleet base in Garthtown? Putting her hands on her hips, Corsi said, I'm not answering any more questions until you answer some of mine, officer. Finally standing upright, Vale ran her hands through her auburn tresses. I did a search on equipment that could hide all traces of evidence in a manner that would allow these crimes to take place. I found something in the Starfleet database, something that was only just declassified a month ago. So any of the locals investigating the previous homicides wouldn't have even been allowed to know about it. It's a stealth suit, one that is to be used for anthropological observations of pre-warp civilizations. Okay. Corsi had a vague recollection of reading an update about the declassification of that technology. What does that have to do with this? Only one of the murders had a witness, the second one on Centauri. Corsi nodded. El Regren. The Trill was a computer programmer who was engaged to be married. Right. Vale sighed. That witness claimed that the phaser blast seemed to come out of nowhere. Since it was dark, the detective in charge assumed that the witness just didn't see the murderer, but what if he couldn't? Vale turned her screen around so Corsi could see it. Starfleet has a presence at all 4 locations. Starbase 74 is in orbit of Tarsus 3, there's a base on Berengaria, a supply depot on Alpha Centauri that Starfleet leases, and the base here on Garthtown. Now Corsi was getting irritated. She didn't even bother to look at the screen. What of it? I doubt there's a planet in the Federation that doesn't have some kind of Starfleet presence somewhere, and you can't possibly believe that a Starfleet officer could do this. Vale snapped. I can't possibly believe that a sentient being did this, Lieutenant. But the evidence sure as hell indicates that one did. You will modify your tone when speaking to me, officer, Corsi said in a low, dangerous voice. She had had just about enough of this amateur civilian as she was likely to take. No, Lieutenant, I don't think I will. You see, I found something interesting when I did a search of Starfleet personnel who were either assigned to or in the vicinity of the 4 facilities in question and then cross-checked it with people who'd have access to classified technology. We got only 3 hits. One of them was Lieutenant Dar Ableen. Corsi felt her mouth go dry. What? Lieutenant Ableen was on or near the site of all 11 murders, including working in the supply office of Starbase 74. The stealth suit was developed by a research team on that starbase, and Lieutenant Ableen was assigned to them as their supply officer. Lieutenant Ableen's height and build also matched with the likely height and build of the murderer. Corsi could not believe what she was hearing. This is absurd. Dar would never do anything like this. He can't possibly... She shook her head as if coming out of a daze. You said there were 3 hits? I've already been in contact with Captain Van Olden, and the other 2 are being tracked down. Meantime, I intend to question Lieutenant Ableen. Now Corsi was furious. You went over my head? I ought to... And then she cut herself off. Of course she went over my head. The evidence makes Dar at least to be a suspect, and she had to eliminate him. Naturally, she's going to treat me suspiciously. Stop being an idiot. I apologize, officer. You're right. I have a relationship with a suspect in a homicide investigation. It would be inappropriate for me to remain as the liaison between the ISAR peace officers and Starfleet. Vale let out a long breath, sounding relieved. Thank you, Lieutenant. Honestly, I don't believe you have anything to do with this. You've been too thorough in digging through the evidence, but I had to be sure. Don't worry about it. Look, let me call Dar in here. He'll come in on his own, answer your questions, and everything will be fine. I've known Dar since we were first-year cadets. I can't believe he'd do anything like this. Like I said, Lieutenant, I can't believe anyone would do this, which means that anyone could be responsible. I'm not feeling very trusting right now. Corsi smiled at that. I'm in security. We're never trusting. It gets in the way of the work. Vale returned the smile. That sounds like something my mother would say. Sure enough, Dar was more than happy to beam over from Garthtown. A few minutes later, his lean form beamed directly into Vale's office. Lieutenant Ableen, I'm Officer Christine Vale. She stepped around her desk and offered her hand, but not, Corsi noted, in a handshake. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you for your weapon. Corsi hadn't even noticed that Dar had his sidearm. Damn, Dar, how dumb can you get? Corsi had her phaser, of course, but she was security. She needed to be armed at all times. There were times when Corsi wondered why they even bothered to issue weapons to supply officers like Dar. Besides, this building had a scattering field that prevented unauthorized weapons from firing. Even with that, though, regulations stated only that only peace officers could carry any kind of weapon in here. Corsi's status as a Starfleet liaison let her off the hook, though that was murkier now, but Dar wasn't allowed to have his, even though it didn't work at the moment. Dar gave Vale the melting smile that he had perfected on Domenica by their 3rd year at the Academy. Be happy to, officer. He unholstered the phaser, held it out to Vale, then grabbed her wrist with the other hand and yanked Vale toward him in a modified Sokpal grab from the Vulcan Vishan martial art, at which Dar was at the level of Anwas, which was as high as any human had achieved. Before Corsi had had a chance to register what had happened, he had Vale in a Roll Shaya grip. Corsi had been in Dar's Roll Shaya before. The officer wasn't moving until Dar let her. You know the grip, Domenica, Dar said. I make one slight muscle movement with my right forearm and her neck snaps like a twig. Pity, really. He smiled again, but this wasn't the melting smile. It was one she'd never seen on his face before. I'd rather the 3rd kill was like the first 2. The rush is so much better that way. Corsi shook her head. So it was you. Of course it was me. How could you even doubt it? Now put your phaser down, Domenica. Let me go with the officer here so I can kill her properly like the other 2. Glancing down, Corsi saw that she had in fact drawn her phaser as soon as Dar grabbed Vale. The action hadn't been conscious, but drilled into her after all her years of security training. The next action she took was completely conscious. Pausing only for a second to aim, she blew Dar Ableen's head off. Chapter 11. USS Da Vinci in search operations between stations Kel Artis and Deep Space Nine. Now. Fabian Stevens stared at Domenica Corsi in shock. My God, Dom, you... He shook his head, barely able to parse what she'd just told him. What happened next? She shrugged. It was over. Izar went back to normal. Vale and I both got commendations. I tried to point out that she was the one who did all the legwork, but she insisted that I was the one who saved the day. She told me... Domenica hesitated. She told me that she could never have done what I did. Just shoot him like that, especially given our relationship. Chuckling bitterly, she added, she applied to Starfleet Academy the next week. Said she'd always wanted to, but didn't want to let her family down. But after seeing me in action, she knew it was the right thing to do. I told her then that she was nuts. Yeah, Fabian said dryly. I can see how you think that, after all. I mean, she's just security chief on the Enterprise, after all. Not that that's a major assignment or anything. Harshly, Domenica said, I didn't mean that she would be bad security, Fabe. I meant that she was nuts to use me as an example. All I did was shoot the man I loved. His thoughts still whirling, Fabian asked, why did he do it? How? I don't have any answers to any of that. Domenica's voice was a rough whisper now. He was dead as soon as I shot him. I didn't have a choice. He'd already killed 11 people, and Vale would have been number 12 if I didn't do something. I couldn't afford to hesitate or try to talk him down. This was someone who'd gotten away with 11 murders. I couldn't... Her voice broke. She was staring down at the deck, Fabian's hand still on hers. Fabian had known Domenica since he signed on to the Da Vinci during the Dominion War. In those 2 years, he'd never heard her voice break. Not even when they went to visit her family at Felina 3, when they both fell apart in front of each other. Then he did some mental calculations, recalling the dates on the reports he'd looked up before coming here. I just realized something. The night you came to me, right before we helped Nog drive the Andrasi off Empok Nor. The first time we made love, he didn't say out loud. That was the anniversary, wasn't it? Domenica nodded. He cupped her chin with his hand and guided her head up so he could look at her. Tears marred her beautiful blue eyes. In a soft voice, he asked, is that what that night was all about? Again, she nodded. Wasn't the first time. Usually I tried to spend the anniversary with someone, just to remind myself that I was capable of feeling something. And also to distract myself. Most of the time, I don't think about Izar or Dar or Vale at all. It's a little hard when she came with LaForge that time, but I managed. On the anniversary, though? Shaking his head, Fabian said, God, no wonder that new kid set you off. And Ken and Ted's death, that must have been deja vu to have another crazy homicide like that. Domenica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the hand that Fabian wasn't holding. Actually, no, it wasn't. Honestly, it didn't even occur to me to consider it similar. Like I said, I don't think about it. She let out a snort. And when I do think about it, I don't consider it a homicide investigation. I think of it as the day I had to kill the man I loved. Fabian couldn't help but hear bitterness and guilt in her tone. Life in Starfleet had given him plenty of first-hand experience with both, and he quickly said, Dom, this wasn't your fault. Right! Domenica yanked her hand out from under Fabian's and stood up. Her flannel robe swished about her legs in a manner Fabian might have found erotic under better circumstances. 8 years, Fabe. Dar and I were lovers for 8 years. And all that time, I had no clue that he was psychotic. You mind telling me whose fault that is? His. That brought Domenica up short. She turned around and faced him with a confused look on her face. What? It's Ableen's fault, Dom. You say you had no clue. How are you supposed to? There have been, 2 documented cases of this kind of homicidal insanity in the Federation in the last 100 years? Something like that, she said quietly. Getting up from the bed, Fabian put his hands on her broad shoulders. They were about the same height, with Domenica a few centimeters shorter, which had always struck Fabian as odd since he felt shorter than her, so he could look her right in her tear-streaked eyes when he said, There was no way you could have known, Dom. The only thing you could have done was what you did. She looked away. I wish I could believe that. Well, since it's actually true, there's no good reason why you shouldn't. Blinking away more tears, Domenica looked back at him. Fabe, Senior staff and S.C.E. team, report to the bridge. Fabian closed his eyes and sighed. Timing is everything. Wiping the tears, Domenica was suddenly Corbridge again. They must have found Lense and Bashir. Without any hesitation, she removed her robe and went over to the closet to grab a uniform. Fabian found himself admiring the view, and was encouraged by her lack of self-consciousness around him. You want me to meet you there? As she started to get dressed, she said, No, we can go up together. That prompted a smile. After that first night, she had formally requested that they never speak of it again, and when they were summoned to the observation lounge, she had gone ahead, not wanting to be seen walking in with him. After she got her uniform jacket on, she walked up to him and kissed him. Fabian was a bit taken aback, and so it took him a moment to return the kiss. There was a bit of salty taste from the tears that had streaked down to her mouth, but Fabian found he didn't mind. Thank you, she whispered after the kiss broke. For what? He whispered back. A lot of things. For being there when I needed you on the anniversary, she chuckled, for ignoring me when I said it wasn't the start of something, and for getting me to talk tonight. Honestly, I think it's the first time I've really talked about Dar and Izar since, ever, really. They started to walk toward the door. It parted on their approach. You feel any better about it? He asked. Not sure. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad you're the one I told. They held hands as they walked to the turbolift. Fabian was stunned. A public display of affection was unheard of in the Dominica Corsi Code of Proper Behavior, but he wasn't about to say anything. And in fact, when they passed by Rye Langford and Riz walking the other way down the corridor, the human and Bolian gaped openly. Dominica didn't even pay attention as they entered the turbolift doors. However, as the doors closed on Rye and Riz's astonished faces, she burst into a giggle. Dom, did you just giggle? You know, I think I did. I also think I kind of liked it. He grinned. Me too. However, the new, improved Dominica Corsi was only going to last so long. As soon as they arrived on the bridge, she let go of his hand and Corbreach was back. Captain Gold was in his usual seat, of course, with Commander Gomez and Tev standing on either side of him. Soloman, P8 Blue, Carol Abramowitz, and Bart Falwell were standing or sitting at the aft consoles behind Tony Shabalala at Tactical. Dominica went to stand next to Tony. Fabian took a seat next to Bart. Bart whispered, "Coming in together? Isn't that interesting?" "Very interesting, yes," Fabian said completely seriously, which had brought Bart, who had only been teasing, up short. "I assume we'll talk later." It wasn't a question. Bart, Fabian's roommate, was the only person who had known about Fabian and Domenica's one-night stand back when it was just a one-night stand, and he'd been a good sounding board on more than one occasion. But that was for later. Gomez had turned around and was now addressing the S.C.E. team. "About 10 minutes ago, we detected a duranium fragment that matches the information we got from Nog. It's from the Missouri. We slowed to impulse, and that's when we found this." She turned around. "Put it up, Tony." The forward viewer flickered to show an area of space, the center of which was... Well, Fabian couldn't say what it was. He found his eye wandering from it, unable to focus directly there. Immediately, he turned around and activated the sensors from the console at which he was sitting. "You're wasting your time, Specialist," Tev said disdainfully. Fabian turned to see the Tellarite's disapproving glare. "Because the sensors were retuned to detect the Missouri, they are unable to extrapolate what this anomaly is." Gold spoke for the first time, turning around his center seat to face them, a grave look in his blue eyes. "Whatever that thing is out there, it's right in the Missouri's flight plan, and there's a piece of the Missouri near it." "So we need to retune the sensors back?" Patty asked. Gomez shook her head. "Nancy's on that. She'll have them back to normal within the next 5 minutes. When that's done, I want to know everything there is to know about that, whatever it is, and what it did to our people, and I want to find out yesterday." Fabian heard a determination in the commander's voice that led him to think that, if they didn't do what she wanted, her response would make Domenica's recent treatment of Tomozuka Kim be a walk in the park, by comparison. Chapter 12. USS Da Vinci in search operations between stations Kel Artis and Deep Space Nine, now. Sonia Gomez sat in the science lab on Deck 5 of the Da Vinci, staring at the unknown. This was why she joined Starfleet in the first place. Seeking out the new, the unknown, the unexpected. That was why a lot of people joined Starfleet, of course, but she was an engineer. Because she was an engineer, she also tended to add and learn what makes it tick. What kind of year has it been, she thought, as she stared at the sensor readings of the bizarre anomaly they found near the distressingly small fragment of the Missouri. Has it really been less than a year? She shook her head. Admiral Ross had come to her after the war and her promotion to full commander, with the offer of becoming the first officer of the Da Vinci, a duty that included supervising that ship's contingent of S.C.E. personnel. It was a fantastic opportunity, and one she never regretted accepting. Well, maybe once or twice, she thought with a small smile, grateful that she could smile about the doubts she'd had after Kieran Duffy died. Thoughts of her dead lover prompted thoughts of his replacement. God, what a terrible association. And she looked over at Tev, hunched over another sensor station, wondering what she would do with him. The S.C.E. team she ran was as good a group of people as she'd ever worked with. And Tev was as good as any of them, truly, but his attitude... "Commander!" Sonia looked away from Tev to Solomon, who was at one of the consoles with Fabian Stevens. When she saw the look on his face, she flinched a bit. I didn't know Binars could look like someone had walked over their grave. "What is it, Solomon?" "We got a doozy here, Commander," Fabian said. "The energy readings we're getting keep fluctuating." "So does the structure," Patty Blue added. "Every time I think I have an idea of this thing's shape, it completely alters." "However," said Solomon, "I recognize one of the energy signatures. It matches the data patterns we found emanating from Empok Nor." Now Sonia understood Solomon's apprehension. Only a couple of weeks ago they'd encountered another universe that was seeking out information in this one, a request that almost destroyed the Bajoran system. Both Solomon's dead bondmate 111 and Kieran Duffy were alive in that universe. It had been a bit of an emotional roller coaster, but especially for Solo Man, who had, for the first time, lied to Sonia and the captain in order to get a chance to see 111 again, even an alternate one. The patterns changed again, Fabian said, but I'm starting to think that this may be another gateway between universes. Not another one, Sonia said with a sigh. Tev suddenly stood up. Commander, I need to go to engineering. Sonia frowned. Why? I must Tev cut himself off, took a breath, and then spoke in a much calmer tone. Request permission to modify one of our Class 1 probes to investigate the anomaly. When I was assigned to the Madison, I devised a program. Oh, that's a little progress. Aloud, Sonia said, I'm familiar with the program, Tev. That's why Nancy's people are already modifying one of them with a variation on your program. Should be ready in another 2 minutes or so. Ah! At first, Tev looked deflated, then perked up. A variation? Of what sort? It's something we came up with here, right after I signed on. A form of sensor compression that triples the amount of information the probe can take in. Solomon and Stevens rewrote your program about 6 months ago to utilize that angle as well. Why was I not... Again, Tev stopped himself. 6 months? Yep. We pay attention to what engineers on other ships are doing, too. Fabian chuckled. For example, Lieutenant Rao on the Musgrave makes a mean set of Osna dumplings. Conlon de Gomez, it's done and loaded, Commander. Tapping her comm badge, Tony said, Good work, Nancy. Gomez to bridge. Tony, there's a modified Class 1 probe there's a modified Class 1 in the probe launcher. I'm reading it, Commander. Launch it, please, and have the telemetry sent down here. Yes, ma'am. Seconds later, the probe's telemetry started showing up on her screen, fed from Tony Shabalala's tactical station. That's what I thought, Patty said. Walking over to the specially modified chair the NASAT was sitting in, Sonia asked, What did you think? I finally figured out this thing's structure. It's perfectly spherical. That's ridiculous! Tev got up and walked over to Patty's station. The structure has been inconsistent. It is obviously a variable construction that... Pointing at the sensor results with 2 of her pincers, Patty said, No, it isn't, unless that program of yours doesn't work right. Anyhow, I figured this out 5 minutes ago. The probe just verified it. What that thing does is change the structure of space around it, at the subquark level, making it look like there's a structure there, but there isn't. What is variable is the way and amount of space it changes. Tev was now staring at Patty's screen. I believe you are right, Specialist. Congratulations. Fabian shot a look at Sonia. Sonia just smiled and said, Okay, now we have a better idea of what it does. The question is, can we find out what happened to the runabout? My best hypothesis is that the runabout did not detect the anomaly, Tev said. Yeah, Fabian said. We only saw it at all because we slowed down after finding the fragment. If they weren't looking, the Missouri could have barreled right into it. Suddenly, the lights in the ship dimmed. Half a second later, the red alert klaxon blared. I've lost probe telemetry, Patty said. We're moving, Sonia said, as she felt the vibration of the deck plates through her boots. Backing off at 1/4 impulse. A wise precaution, Tev said. Gold to Science Lab. Reassure an old man Gomez that my ship it won't get blown to bits. Sonia walked back to the console she'd been using to verify her readings. Probe's been destroyed, sir. As far as we've been able to determine, the anomaly is caused by a small spherical object that's altering space around it. Tapping his comm badge while hunched over his own console, Fabian said, Sir, I've just verified that every time it changes the fabric of space, not only does the size of the area it alters vary, but each time it does, the space has a different quantum signature. In English, Stevens. Sonia and Tev both verified what Fabian just said. Confirmed, Tev said. This device is a gateway to parallel universes, akin to the one we communed with on Impact Nor. Current configuration, Fabian said, is a diameter of about 200 meters. He looked up. If it was this big, there'd be no way the Missouri could miss it. What are you saying, Stevens? Gold asked. Sonia gritted her teeth. It means that the effect of this device is expanding. A tinkling noise was followed by, I found something! Dashing back over to where Patty sat, Sonia asked, What is it? I was going over what we got from the probe. Take a look. With 3 of her pincers, she pointed at the screen. Sonia saw what she did. They had detected another fragment of duranium, one that matched that of the material that made up the Missouri. As David Gold sat down in the observation lounge, he said without preamble, Tell me we have some way of getting Lense and Bashir out of that mess. Working on it, sir, Gomez said as she took her seat to Gold's right. Tev sat on his left with Soloman next to him. Stevens took his seat next to Gomez. Corsi next to him. Gold noted that Corsi and Stevens came in together and sat together naturally, moving almost as one. Blue was at her specially modified seat at the other end. Talk to me. We've lost too many people on this ship already. I'm not standing for it happening again. Sir, Tev said, I feel constrained to point out that we have no empirical proof that either of the passengers aboard the runabout are still alive, nor that the runabout is still intact. Quickly, Gomez added, having said that, at least now we have a working theory about what happened. Gold nodded. Over the past year, he'd learned to trust Sonia Gomez's working theories a lot better than most people's facts. Touching a control in front of her caused the viewer on the wall to light up with a sensor scan. In red was a spherical object. Random shapes appeared around it, one yellow, then replaced with a differently shaped blue, with the third shape in green, and so on. The sphere in the middle is the device that's causing all this. It's opening up a gateway between quantum realities. Before it was destroyed by the device's expanding field, Tev said, the probe was able to scan the surface of the device, but not penetrate its interior workings. The technology is unfamiliar. Stevens put in, but it probably opens up quantum fissures somehow. Back when he was in Starfleet, Ambassador Worf encountered a natural fissure that sent him on a joyride through about a dozen quantum realities. This thing probably does artificially what that fissure did naturally. Although he was listening, Gold was also watching the colors change. There's a pattern to it. Smiling in the way that a professor smiled at a student who got a right answer, Gomez said, That's it exactly, sir. The device is currently cycling through 6 different quantum realities. In addition, the field keeps expanding, which is why we got shook up. The Da Vinci was right at the event horizon of the fissure. If we'd been even 10 meters closer, we'd have been dragged into the fissure and into another quantum reality. Which, Tev said, is what we hypothesize happened to the Missouri. Blue added, We were able to detect debris from the runabout in one of the quantum realities. Sir, there's something else. Gomez hesitated. I can take it, Gomez. Spill. Based on the rate of expansion, we think that the device was activated a little more than 2 weeks ago. About when Empok Nor started endangering the Bajoran system. We think that whatever the Binars did in that other quantum reality, it also set this thing off. Gewalt, Gold muttered. Unable to help himself, he glanced at Soloman, who looked a bit guilty. I am sorry for what happened, Captain Gold, the Binar said. Stop schwitzing, Soloman, Gold said, although Binars did not, as far as he could determine, sweat. It wasn't your fault. It's the fault of whoever it was in that universe who thought probing ours was such a hot idea. He leaned back in his chair. All right. Looks like we have 2 things to accomplish. Get our 2 doctors back and shut this thing down. Something else this device does, Gomez says, is alter the quantum signature of whatever passes through it. The debris that Patty detected is a molecular match for the Missouri, but its quantum signature matches that of the universe it's in. Which means, she added quickly, probably noting the expression on Gold's face, we can go in after the Missouri. But when we do, we'll only have 7 minutes and 22 seconds to find the runabout, rescue Elizabeth and Dr. Bashir, and come back. Gold sighed. I know you can't answer this, but I'm going to ask anyhow. What happens if we take longer than 7 minutes and 22 seconds? We wait for the 36 minutes and 50 seconds it'll take to cycle through the other 5 quantum realities, and hope for the best. Blue said, The good news is, sir, is that we continue to detect the Missouri in the quantum reality in question. That means we'll have that 37 minutes. Testily, Tev said, 36 minutes, specialist, and 50 seconds. Making a tinkling noise of annoyance, Blue said, I was rounding up. Before his engineers could devolve into an argument, Gold said, What about the other part? Well, that part's pretty straightforward, Stevens said. According to Worf's report, the fissure was closed by using a broad-spectrum warp field to collapse it. Creating that will not be a problem. Tev spoke with his usual confidence/arrogance. It will require only 20 minutes, less if I am not forced to make tiresome explanations. And here I was about to compliment Tev on how well he seemed to be getting along with others. Gold sighed. Good! Sir, there's only one problem, Corsi said. Everyone turned and looked expectantly at her. She didn't usually contribute to an engineering discussion, but Gold figured she had a security concern. That solution worked on a natural quantum Kuzitz, but this is an artificial one. I fail to see what difference that makes, Tev said. Staring daggers at the second officer, Corsi said, If I was building something like that, the first thing I'd program into it is a failsafe against something that could stop it prematurely. Stevens was nodding. You're saying they might have built in a countermeasure to the warp field. Like I said, it's what I'd do. Gomez folded her arms in front of her. All right. Patty, Fabian, start working on a plan B in case the warp field doesn't work. Soloman, your job is to get the sensors and transporters and engines to talk to one another. We'll only have a few minutes, and we need to set it all on automatic. Find either Elizabeth's or Dr. Bashir's comm badges or their life signs, beam them up, and get us back through the fissure before it cycles. Yes, Commander. Soloman bobbed his bald head. Tev, you and I will calibrate the warp field. The Tellurite started to say something, then stopped. Of course, Commander. Maybe he is getting better, Gold thought with a smile. Just a work in progress. Sir, Corsi said, if we don't find them in the 7 minutes we have, then we have to come back. She didn't phrase it as a question. Yes, Gomez said, but then we can take another shot half an hour later. We'll find them, one way or another. That's what I want to hear, Gold said before Corsi could do her wet blanket impersonation again. Let's find our people. Dismissed. As everyone rose from their chairs, Gold said, Corsi, stay a minute, would you please? Of course. Corsi gave Stevens a look, followed by a smile. It was a pleasant smile, and one Gold had never seen on his security chief's face while on duty before, and damn rarely off duty either. Once they had the room to themselves, Gold said, I hear tell you ran the new recruit through the Glorndon Core scenario. Corsi's face clouded over. Sir, I was under the impression that security was my responsibility. It is. And the Da Vinci's my responsibility. I just want to make sure you aren't pushing your people too hard. Stiffly, Corsi said, I am not pushing them any harder than reality will push them, sir. I only signed off on that scenario being installed because it came with a notation that it would only be used for 10-year veterans. Kim's service record indicates that he hasn't been in the service for 10 years. No, sir. Corsi shook her head and then smiled once again. I actually met him 10 years ago on Izar, and he was just a kid. Sir, I had some concerns about Kim when he signed on. That's why I ran him a bit rough. Those concerns have been addressed, however, and it won't be happening again. Good! Gold looked at the door through which Stevens had walked a few minutes before. So, is there anything else going on I need to know about, say, between you and Stevens? She stiffened up again. Nothing that will affect my duties, sir. That wasn't what I asked, Corsi. Humor an old man, will you? Again she relaxed. Again she smiled. You asked if there was anything you need to know about, sir. Gold laughed. Fair enough. I trust both your judgments. Just be careful, Corsi. I don't think anybody on this ship needs to be reminded. No, sir, I don't. In fact, I need that reminder less than anyone else, quite frankly. She stiffened yet again. Gold thought she was going to strip her treads, switching gears so often like that. Then she relaxed yet again. But I'll be careful, sir. We both were. Good! Dismissed. Nodding, Corsi departed the observation lounge. Smiling, Gold headed for the bridge. His people were on the case, and he had every confidence in their ability to do their jobs. Corsi stood in the transporter room. Angelopoulos and Kim by her side, with Pointer, Gomez, and Tev all standing at the transporter station. Corsi thought that was overkill, especially since the transporter was on automatic. All they could do was monitor what was happening, and Pointer could do that just as easily. But she understood why Gomez and Tev would want to be present when the doctors were rescued. If they were rescued. It was, of course, as likely as not that the Missouri didn't survive the encounter with the alien device, that the debris that Patty found was all that was left of it, and of the two doctors. Corsi had insisted on the teams being present, and since it was Alpha Shift, that meant her, Kim, and Angelopoulos. She regarded the two younger men. They both were in full attention mode, hands hovering close to their sidearms. Taking a breath, she made a decision. While I've got a minute, she said quietly to the two of them, I just wanted to say something. Kim, I know I've been a little hard on you. I'm not going to apologize for it. I don't apologize for anything. This isn't a pleasure cruise, and this isn't an opportunity for you to relive the glory of your youth or indulge in hero worship or whatever other reason you had for joining. Sir, Kim started, but then Angelopoulos spoke. Hey, don't interrupt the commander. Apologies, sir. Please, continue. Inwardly, Corsi smiled. Angelopoulos had been a model guard since he made an ass of himself during the Artemis debrief. That didn't mean he was out of her doghouse yet, just that she knew his being there was doing some good. Thanks, Angelopoulos. My point is, Kim, that as hard as I'm driving you, reality will drive you harder. This isn't an easy road you've chosen, and it's one that can get you killed if you're not careful. Sometimes it'll get you killed if you are careful. I need people I can count on to protect this ship. Period. You can count on me, Commander, Kim said. I didn't join so I could serve with you, or with Lieutenant Vale. I mean, I'm glad that I'm serving with you, but that doesn't change my desire to serve. He hesitated. I'll do my best to live up to Caetano's example, sir. Tev had moved off to an auxiliary station that was tied into the bridge. Approaching event horizon. Corsi turned back to face the transporter. It's a tall order, Kim. Although she wasn't facing him, Corsi could hear the cheeky grin in Kim's voice. If the orders weren't tall, ma'am, they wouldn't need security. She could also hear the wince in Angelopoulos'. God, you got trained by Pelicanos, too. Best teacher I ever had, Kim said. Augusto Caetano was the best I ever had, and I let his son die. Corsi shook her head. No, that's wrong. His death and Devereux led us to a weapon that would have killed millions. Maybe it wasn't the standard way, but he died doing what security was supposed to do. I shot Dar, I was doing what security's supposed to do, too. For the first time in 10 years, she realized that that was what Christine Vale and Tomozuka Kim saw on that day on Izar 10 years ago. Maybe it's time I gave both of them credit for it. Now entering new quantum reality. Sensors indicate our quantum signatures have been altered. For some reason, Corsi had expected some kind of fanfare, but if there was any transition that the Da Vinci experienced by going from one universe to another, it wasn't felt in the transporter room. She found that vaguely disappointing. Pointer said, Solomon's program's running. Sensors have found a planet. Checking for comm badge and human life signs. They got it! That was fast, Gomez muttered. Oh no. Corsi didn't like the sound of that. What is it? We've got Elizabeth's comm badge and 2 human life signs. Plenty of other life signs, but those are the only 2 human ones. But one of them's in bad shape, near death, and we're reading projectile weapons fire. Shooting Gomez a glance, Corsi saw the look of horror on her face. She, along with Hawkins, Abramowitz, and Stevens, had been on the receiving end of more than their share of projectile weapons fire on Tenev, and all 4 of them were nearly killed. Tev said, We are about to achieve standard orbit of the planet. Transporters activating, Pointer said. Gomez tapped her comm badge. Medical team to transporter room. Incoming wounded. The transporter hummed to life, and 2 figures appeared. Corsi barely recognized the one who was crouching as Elizabeth Lenz, who was shouting something that sounded like Finnish as she materialized. The naked, scarred, prone figure was hardly at all recognizable as Julian Bashir. Leaving orbit, Tev said. 2 minutes remaining. Lenz jumped back up. No, damn it, you've got to send me back. Elizabeth, we detected gunfire, Gomez said quickly. Besides, if we don't leave now, we risk never getting back home again. I'm sorry. Wetzel and Falchao came in with 2 gurneys. Lenz refused to get on one, but helped Bashir onto the other one. I could have saved her, damn it! Corsi wasn't sure what that meant. Did she have a Dar of her own on that planet? Or had her Dar succeeded in harming her Vale? Tev's voice snapped right at it. Crossing the event horizon back into our quantum reality. Quantum signatures reverting to normal. Lenz led the team out into the corridor without another word. Well, Gomez said after a moment, I'm betting there's a story there. Mm-hmm, Corsi said with a nod. Chapter 13. USS Da Vinci en route to rendezvous with USS Defiant, now. So we hit the thing with a broad-spectrum warp field, and it worked the first time! The fissure collapsed, the alien device shut down, and we're no longer poking into other universes. I was stunned! Corsi smiled at Stephen's words. Why? Because that was Plan A! Plan A never works! First time for everything, I guess. She smiled as she sipped her Ractigino. She had just come off shift, but was She had just come off shift, but was letting Lenz have their quarters to herself for the time being. Whatever she and Bashir went through in that other quantum reality, an ordeal that apparently on that side took a lot longer than the 2 weeks she was gone on this side of it, had a huge impact on her. Corsi assumed that Lenz would talk about it when she was good and ready, which, if past history is any guide, will be approximately never. So she and Stevens were sitting in the mess hall, sharing a couple of Ractiginos. She added, I guess whoever built that device wasn't as smart as me. Stevens deadpanned, or was just one of those engineers who always have their head in the clouds so they don't think about the real world. Gee, do we know anybody like that? She asked with a cheeky grin. 1 or 2, but we're working on them. He winked. Then he checked his chronometer. Crap, I need to get to the HoloLab. Tev called a staff meeting. Apparently his Royal Highness had some ideas about how to streamline our procedures. He gulped down the rest of his Ractigino and stood up. On the other hand, he was actually playing well with others when we were searching for the runabout, so maybe he's improving. God knows he couldn't get any worse. I'll see you later. She also rose. Count on it. Then she grabbed him and kissed him. To her amazement, part of what she enjoyed about the kiss was that she was doing it right in front of everyone in the mess hall, including Hawkins, Croteen, and Lawak, who had just entered. Lawak was just released from sickbay that morning, Lenz's second official act upon reporting back for duty following saving Bashir's life, and was already back in uniform, even though he wouldn't be back on duty until Alpha Shift the next day. Grinning ear to ear, Stevens departed the mess hall. He and Hawkins exchanged some quick words, accompanied by laughter, and then he departed. The trio then went to the replicator. Hawkins got a synthale, Lawak a Tarkalian tea, and Croteen a Frimlike, and then approached Corsi's table. Mind if we join you, boss? Hawkins asked. Indicating the other chairs at the table, Corsi said, Have a seat. Lawak, good to see you up and around. Ready for duty, Commander, Lawak said, sounding no worse for the wear, despite the horrid beating he took from the mad Vorta on Koroticus. You're not on duty until 0800 tomorrow. That's just a technicality. With the Commander's permission, I'd like to run some scenarios. Maybe with the new guy. Kim thought I was rough. Wait till Lawak gets through with it. Knock yourself out, Lawak. But you'll either have to do it in the next hour or wait until 2100. Tev has the hololab until then. Protein asked, is Commander Gomez really making him take sensitivity training? I wouldn't presume to know why Commander Tev is using the hololab, Corsi said seriously. Then she chuckled. But as it happens, there may have been something about that in a conversation with Commander Gomez a while back. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, Hawkins said emphatically, holding up his ale in a mock toast. I'll drink to that, Protein said, then gulped down some of her Frimlike. After placing the mug down on the table, she turned to Corsi. Commander? What was that with you and Mr. Stevens? I was wondering that myself, Hawkins said with a wide grin. Corsi let out a long breath. I guess I should tell you all that Mr. Stevens and I are a couple. Still grinning, Hawkins asked, with all due respect, boss, was that supposed to be a secret? Corsi laughed, and the others did the same, except Lawak, who didn't really laugh so much as smile enigmatically. Yeah, she said, it was a secret. From me. A little while later, Corsi went back to her cabin, having determined that Lense was in sickbay. She had spent the better part of an hour just talking with her people, and she found it to be quite pleasant. Hawkins was a good deputy, and she had herself a security team that was as good as any she'd ever served with. Eventually, though, she excused herself. There was something she needed to do. She entered her cabin, went to the replicator, and asked for a glass of water, then sat at her desk. With a shiver, she realized that Caetano had asked for the replicator for a glass of water before he dropped dead in his cabin. Stop being an idiot, she admonished herself. Entering several commands into the comm station, she opened a channel to the Enterprise. A few minutes later, the deceptively innocent-looking face of Christine Vale appeared. She had cut her hair and changed its color since that day on Izar. It was currently brown and in a pixie cut, as opposed to the long auburn it was then, but she still looked very much like the detective Corsi had naively assumed to be incompetent 10 years ago. Commander Corsi! Vale seemed stunned. Is something wrong? No, Lieutenant, nothing's wrong at all. She hesitated. I just wanted to tell you something, Christine, something I should have told you a long time ago. You should be proud of what you accomplished. I know I am. Proud, that is, to be in the service with you. Now Vale looked even more stunned. Thanks, Domenica. Thank you very much. I can't begin to tell you. She took a breath. I owe it all to you, you know. Like hell. You don't owe me anything to me, Christine. You were the one who figured out that it was Dar. It took you 3 days to see something that I managed to miss for 8 years. All I did... Her voice caught. Until yesterday, she hadn't thought about this. And it was still like rubbing an open wound. All I did was shoot him. Anybody could have done that. That's good of you to say, Domenica, but I don't think I could have done what you did. Sure you could have, because you're good security. We deal with the unexpected and keep people safe. And that doesn't come from outside. She smiled. I just hope that Picard and the rest of those guys know what they have there. Returning the smile, Vale said, well, if they ever forget, I'll be sure to send them to you. You do that. Take care of yourself, Christine, and take care of your ship. You do the same, Domenica. And thanks. Corsi closed the connection, then got up and headed to the door, then to the security office. True, she wasn't on duty, but like Lawak said, that was just a technicality. She had a ship to protect. That's the end. Thank you very much for watching. Next week, we will commence with my final Starfleet Corps of Engineers story, which is actually a flashback. It was called Many Splendors. In 2006, for the 40th anniversary of Star Trek, I did a special thing with the Corps of Engineers, a 6-part series called What's Past, which was all flashback stories. I'll go into more detail about what that was about next week. But for my contribution of Many Splendors, I chronicled the entirety of the Gomez-Duffy relationship on the USS Enterprise D. It also provides kind of a unique perspective on the events of the 2nd through 5th seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation, as experienced through LaForge's engineering crew. We'll see a bunch of characters who were guest stars on various Next Gen episodes, and chronicle Gomez and Duffy's relationship that's been referred to several times in the S.C.E. series, but we get to actually see it as it developed and both started and ended on the Enterprise. Thank you very much again for watching. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. You can read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. You can follow me on Facebook at Keith R.A. DeCandido, on Twitter at KRAD, at Instagram at KRAD418. Read my writing at Tor.com, and please support me on Patreon at Patreon.com/KRAD. There's all sorts of cool stuff there, and it's cheap. Please get vaccinated. Wear your masks. Wash your hands. Stay safe. Thank you.